This is Jane Rikas with Emotional Empowerment DBT and internal family systems, along with radically open DBT concepts that I'm trying to make visual for people. So what this diagram that I created represents initially is that we have our self-energy state that we can access, that is not a part, that is the seat of consciousness, that is essentially our soul, and it's represented by the green surrounding ring, rather than, I've done this diagram before where it was sort of the foundation and a strip along the bottom. What I wanted to represent by this green ring surrounding everything is that when we're in a part, and the parts are the firefighters, managers, and exiles, we can't actually see the or access the green ring until we do a process called unburdening and sort of integrating, where, so for instance, if you start over here on the right, within the inner circle, it says doubtful. And as you connect with self-energy, you experience your confidence. Within the inner circle, you feel indifferent and sort of shut off. And when you reconnect with self, you feel curious. When within you feel dull, and connecting with self, you feel creative. Within the parts, you feel confused, and when you reconnect with self-energy, you feel clarity. Fear or feeling afraid can then be transmuted into feeling courageous. Anxiety can be calmed. Feeling animosity or at odds with other people, adversarial, we can rest back in compassion, and we can feel very disconnected and alone and reconnect with self as well as others. So the next part of the diagram has to do with these exiles in the lower half of the circle, inner circle, that's in a gray area. And then I drew that there's like a wall or an overhang sort of separating, because the exiles are traumatic memories and painful experiences that become frozen and walled off. And so what we're doing in order to try to keep those down so that we don't have to re-experience all those traumas or overwhelming emotions is through the top two parts, which are two different categories of what's called protectors. So we have managers and firefighters. When you're in a manager state, this blue bell curve represents, you start out and you are just taking care of daily tasks, and then let's say you pick up on something consciously or subconsciously that feels like an indication of danger, and the arousal state rises, and you either approach the threat and go into fight energy, or retreat from the threat and go into flight energy. If it gets to the point where it's beyond fight or flight and you're experiencing terror, which you may be very conscious of, or it could be subconscious, then we tend to go into hyperarousal or the freeze state, which can be referred to as failed inhibition. So we don't have the brakes. We don't have a way to like stop the eruption of terror. And at that point, so what the manager's job is to keep the exiles suppressed and repressed and contained. Once you get to the point where you're experiencing some kind of breakthrough beyond the point that you can contain it, the firefighters jump in to extinguish the fire that has come out into the conscious or subconscious awareness in the moment. And so when we are stuck in hyperarousal, it's like a deer in the headlights. What I put for fight is the honey badger, and flight the gecko because it's lizard brain. So then we also can, if you feel like it's a threat to your life, go into fold or faint, which is when the dorsal vagal parasympathetic response goes too far into hypoarousal. So I have the opossum playing dead, and we can do that internally, and that is through things like dissociation. It's also when we might experience suicidal ideation, because it's just like, okay, I give up, I'm out of here, this is not doable. The desire to play dead becomes thoughts of self-harm, etc. So this would be called over-inhibition. So we have failed inhibition, no break, or the break is repressed too far. It's also when we sort of have confusion, brain fog, and then within this whole section up here with the firefighters, it's also very shame-based. That's partly why we might go into suicidal ideation, is that one of the exiles that's the most painful for us to face is that sense that there's something that makes us not deserve to be here. So firefighters are also addictions, addictive behaviors, addictive processes, where we are trying to create a break to deal with that hyperarousal, or we are trying to extinguish, so throwing alcohol on the fire, which wouldn't really work, but you get the point of like, we wouldn't feel anymore. So addictions have that role. Also wanted to mention within the bandwidth of managers, we also have fawn. So a lot of times you hear fight or flight. Well, there's fight or flight, or freeze, or fold, or faint, or fawn. So I have a doe over here. And that is when we are in a manager state, caretaking and people pleasing, in order to try to keep the peace, stay safe, regulate other people, avoid conflict. So you have some other manager states that are examples would be, if you're in fight, it's an angry protector. We have perfectionist and inner critic within this manager category. Also workaholic, do to try to control and prevent problems. Workaholism can also be a firefighter if it puts you into sort of a zoned out, disconnected trance. And procrastination, believe it or not, is a manager, which is trying to prevent being graded, being judged, failing, being disappointed. So it can actually be a sister to perfectionism. So keep in mind that the managers and firefighters actually don't operate in a way that they're like opposites. They don't appreciate each other. There's what's called polarization. So when the anything in a manager category no longer works, the firefighter jumps in and basically says, well, you suck because you failed, so we have to do the big guns. And the manager part says, oh my God, you are so out of control, so lazy, so indulgent, so disgusting. So exiles feel shame, managers shame. Firefighters are where the when shame's in an exile state, we're not actually feeling it. When shame is in a firefighter state, it's so overwhelming we actually want to potentially think about suicide. So the firefighting behavior of addictions, if you think about it, it's actually it really has a positive intent, which sounds counterintuitive, but it is to try um, to protect the system from this more dangerous eruption. In general, there's a few comments just to keep in mind while looking at this process, which is that all parts are welcome. In other words, we're not trying to get rid of any part. What the goal of internal family systems is to have your parts all eventually work together and understand and trust the self energy again. They will have felt abandoned by self in the past, or those parts wouldn't have been created. So you really are repairing a rupture in an internal relationship with aspects of yourself. And then you also want to think about that all parts have positive intention, and that is that even the most what seems negative or destructive behavior is based on something for your survival, and so you need to get to that underlying need that's being met, or that strategy that's positive, and appreciate it and acknowledge and validate it before the managers will feel safe enough to relax and possibly consider another strategy. Then down here, ask permission from all the parts. So if you're working on something in your relationship with connecting with your manager, you also want to get the vote of the firefighter, and vice versa, about any strategy for change that you are negotiating. And you also want to work with the protectors, which are the managers and firefighters, before ever going to the exiles. Therapy and therapists are often overly focused on diving into the past trauma without dealing with the polarization of these two protectors. And finally, mentioning that another goal of this would be to update the parts. So parts get created during different developmental times or traumas in your history. And so, for instance, if you have a fawn manager, a people pleaser that started when you were 7 and your parents divorced, just an example, that fawn manager doesn't trust the self, but it's the self when you were 7. And so you can actually do a process of letting the different parts that have been created, as you identify them, know your current age, that you survived the trauma, that you have a lot more skills, that you're trustworthy, that you're willing to maintain a relationship once you've connected with a part, that you're not going to re-abandon it, and so on. So that's updating the parts. All right, so this also can connect to sort of polyvagal understanding and triune brain understanding of how we, when we're in fight or flight, we cut off the frontal cortex, and so we say things we don't mean, and we don't have inhibition. And one last thing that I'll mention is that you can actually be in left brain arousal, where you are in a manager part that is trying to think, worry, to solve a problem, prevent a problem, and also keep those exiles contained and suppressed. So DBT talks a lot about emotion mind, and here would be an example of being in rational mind, but revved up, even increasing arousal, that to where you no longer can really function and certainly can't access self energy. And self energy would be like wise mind. Also, in radically open DBT, I keep saying it'll be the last thing I'm going to say, but there's so much. Self energy is flexible mind. And when you're in managers, that's fixed mind. And when you're in firefighters, that's fatalistic mind. So that's the correlation there. And I think I will stop here. Thank you.